Today, we're going to talk about 11 bad habits that can severely affect your brain. And most of these are going to be quite surprising. In fact, the last one I'm going to talk about is extremely interesting. Bad habit number one, chronic exposure to bad news. So do you ever hear any good things in the news? It's pretty much filled with a lot of fear, doom and gloom, bad news. It's all going to end. You need to go in your house, go underneath your bed and hide because our environment is extremely dangerous to be in. Well, what do you think that does for your health? Well, it drops your emotional state, okay? If you were at one time happy and kind of upbeat, now you're kind of grumpy, you're kind of in anxiety mode, and you might even be in depression. And there's some interesting data that talks about your state of being can affect the structure and the physiology of your body. You actually lose neurons. Your brain actually atrophies. So you might want to control the exposure to bad news. And it also could be people giving you bad news too. We all know a certain personality that tends to not just give us bad news, but turn good news into bad news. Number two, toxic personalities. We have all been into these relationships which basically lower our emotional state, which would actually affect the physiology of our brains. So sometimes it's good to get a long list of all the people that you're associated with and isolate those who are a bit toxic and just put them to the side. You want people that bring you up. You want people that support you. Number three, you are spending way too much time inside your house or a building. It's not very healthy to be inside all the time. It's extremely therapeutic to be outside in the fresh air. And the sun doesn't just necessarily give you vitamin D, which is essential for brain health. It gives you infrared. Now, what is infrared? It's a type of spectral energy that can actually penetrate your body by actually 2 inches. It can actually even go through your skull. And this infrared can stimulate melatonin. The type of melatonin that's a little bit different than the melatonin that's running through your pituitary. It's a type of melatonin that's in all of your cells that acts as an antioxidant that is even more powerful than glutathione. It's the most powerful antioxidant that protects you against so many things, including stress. So inside we have fluorescent lights, poor ventilation, we have a lack of sun, and we also have an alteration of the light and dark cycles. The majority of the population would greatly benefit by taking vitamin D before bed, especially if they have problems sleeping, especially if they are inside way too much and can't get outside. So vitamin D is really important for brain health. All right, number four, being on a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. Now, how does that affect the brain? Well, did you realize that 60% of your brain is fat? Here we have this organ that only makes up 2% of your weight, yet utilizes 20% of all of your energy, and 60% of it is fat. In fact, the brain is the fattiest organ of all your organs. You need this fat to make myelin to help the conductivity of the neurons. The information that goes through your nerve cells travel at a speed of 268 miles per hour. It's incredibly fast. And things that lower our fats or cholesterol, like a low-fat diet or statin drugs, can greatly put us at risk for dementia and a lowered emotional state, whether it's anxiety or even depression. And one really important point is it takes cholesterol to make bile salts, which actually help you absorb vitamin A, D, E, and K. So without those fat-soluble vitamins, as well as the other nutrient omega-3 fatty acid, your brain can greatly suffer. All right, number five, the bad habit of being on a high-grain diet. The recommendation pretty much given by all the medical experts. You must consume at least 60% of your diet in the form of whole grains. Well, there's a problem with whole grains, okay? First of all, it's not as nutritious as you might think. It's very high in omega-6. In the book, Grain Brain, there's a lot of new information talking about how grains affect our brains. Now, when you eat refined grains, you deplete your brain of vitamin B1, and that can create a huge consequence of atrophy in your hippocampus, the part of the brain that's involved with memory and cognitive function. Number six, consuming a lot of sugar Out of all the things that will destroy your brain, sugar is at the top of the list. It's going to eventually create insulin resistance, and that is going to cause a starvation of the neurons, because when you have insulin resistance, we have the situation where we have this high glucose, high insulin, but the resistance doesn't allow the insulin or glucose to feed the neurons. And unless you have ketones floating around, the neurons will starve and you start having all sorts of neurodegenerative problems. In fact, there's a condition called type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's, which occurs from severe insulin resistance. Not to mention the high sugar depletes B1, which creates atrophy of your hippocampus. All right, number 7, and this might surprise you, too much low stress. If you don't have any stress at all, that can be very unhealthy for your brain. Why? Because you're not exercising enough. You don't have enough physical activity that is needed to activate genes for your brain. So there's something called hermetic stress, which basically is a moderate amount of stress that can cause the body to become stronger and more resilient and adapt to a positive state. And that would include the exercise, heat therapy, cold therapy, hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen, training at a higher altitude. So there's a lot of therapy in a moderate amount of stress, or kind of intermittent doses of stress. And also intermittent fasting is a form of stress, because you're not feeding your body any food for certain periods of time, can greatly add a positive stress to allow the brain to actually grow neurons. Not enough stress is just unhealthy as too much stress. And so number 8 is high stress. If you're under chronic high stress, mainly mental stress, or you have a lot of losses or injuries, it's very damaging to the brain, because this activates certain genes in your brain that can turn on dementia, degeneration, inflammation. And so high stress, high cortisol can create atrophy of the hippocampus, the key part of the brain that's involved in cognition, okay? And also high stress, cortisol, depletes you of B1, which also does the same thing. All right, number 9, snacking. Snacking relates to intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is the antidote to snacking. So many people are snacking even healthy foods, and they're unknowingly creating a lot of problems with their brain, because in order to strengthen the brain, especially as we age, we need to do things that can help regenerate neurons. I would even venture to say that snacking is even worse than eating carbohydrates. And why is that? Because not only does carbs increase insulin, but eating in general increases insulin. And when you're eating so frequently, and you have these little snacks, and the mid-afternoon snack and the snack before you go to bed, what you're doing is you're jacking up insulin, creating more insulin resistance, and you're going to affect your brain cells. And you're going to find that that's a really bad habit. And the reason I know that is when a person gives up snacking, boy, do they have a huge positive change in so many things, including things like getting up in the middle of the night, having to urinate. These people that have frequent urination really have insulin resistance. And the most simple thing they can do is give up snacking, especially the snacking or grazing late at night. And boom, they can sleep through the whole night. And they just happen to miraculously get rid of the symptom of frequent urination. Number 10, anything that decreases the microbes in your gut directly affect your brain, like antibiotics, like glyphosate in the GMO food, which, by the way, Monsanto got a patent for glyphosate as being an antibiotic. And unfortunately, the earlier you are exposed to antibiotics in your life, like as a baby, the worse things are. But that's a completely different topic. There's a huge connection between your gut and your brain. Whatever happens down here directly affects here. And you do have a nerve that connects the two, and that's called the vagus nerve. One of the side effects from antibiotics is dementia. Not to mention the great majority of your neurotransmitters, okay, many of the B vitamins that are necessary for brain health are made by these microbes. And number 11, and this is what you've been waiting for, consuming grain-fed animal products versus the grass-fed, grass-finished animal products. Now you're saying, wait a second, where did you get that, Dr. Berg? Well, there's some very interesting data that I want to share with you. I just participated in a very interesting beef nutrient density study where we send off our beef from my farm and they analyzed the beef and they compared it to many farms across the country. And what this was a study comparing the grass-fed beef to the grain-fed beef as far as factors that can contribute to your health and factors that can contribute to disease, okay? So I want to show you this. Check this out. In this first slide, you'll see total phytochemicals. These are phytonutrients. These are plant-based chemicals, okay, that are in beef. And it just so happens that the beef that I sent in just dominated most other, even grass-fed samples, which is quite remarkable. And I'm going to share why I think that is in a minute. So stay tuned. This is going to be interesting. You can see the grain-fed is very low on the phytonutrients, okay? So in general, phytonutrients are antioxidants. They have all sorts of amazing properties. They're anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, et cetera, et cetera. Here's another slide that shows the fatty acid ratio, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios, okay? And on average, grass-fed beef would produce a 3-to-1. That means there's 3 times as much omega-6 to omega-3. And the grain-fed beef on average is an 8-to-1. That's 8 times the omega-6 fatty acid to omega-3 fatty acid. Well, it just so happens that the beef that I sent in there had a 1.5 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. And it just so happens that grain-fed meats are high in omega-6. And so that would increase the risk of inflammation. And by the way, salmon, which is high in omega-3, has a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And I want to show you a couple other slides that are very interesting in relationship to what they found in the study with our cattle. Look at vitamin B3, just incredible amounts compared to the grass-fed as well as the grain-fed. Wow, interesting. Now I want to show you 2 other graphs, which are very, very interesting. In this next graph, you'll see that this value with Dr. Berg's beef is very low, okay? And that is because this identifies advanced glycation end products. This is something that's very, very negative. This is something that contributes to chronic disease of your brain, of the heart. This is what you see in diabetes. So what does this mean? It means that if you are consuming animal products that are higher in advanced glycation end products, this could contribute to a worsening of your health. And the last slide is homocysteine. Now, homocysteine is another biomarker for heart disease risk. Check out how low homocysteine is in the sample that I provided, as well as grass-fed, then compare that to grain-fed. Interesting. So this is just another reason why you should consume grass-fed, grass-finished. Another name for that would be 100% grass-fed. This is all about the ratios. You see, we're trying to get more omega-3 fatty acids into our brain, especially because out of all the fats, 20% is in the form of omega-3, DHA, and especially the gray matter. And so when you have a high ratio of omega-6, it's competing for the omega-3. So even though you might be consuming like cod liver oil or omega-3 fatty acids in your diet, if your omega-6 is too high, it's not going to go in well. And so this is why it's so important to really beef up, no pun intended, the omega-3 fatty acids. And this could potentially lower inflammation in your brain and greatly support your brain health. Now, here's the question that you might be wondering right now. Why are there so many phytonutrients in the beef that we have compared to the typical grass-fed? And that is this. The pastures that I raise my cows on have a much lower ratio of grass. They have a much higher ratio of weeds. That's right. And diversity of weeds. I have many different types of weeds, and I have a smaller amount of grass as compared to a typical pasture with cattle. You're going to have more grasses. And so if you think about it, the more biodiversity that these cows get to feed on, the more different types of weeds and plants that have their own microbiome, the more diversified microbiome they're going to have in their guts. And a lot of these phytochemicals and vitamins are made by the microbiome. And so my theory, and I'm going to do some studies on this to find out for sure, it's the diversity of different plants that really created this profile right here, which could relate to humans. If you were to have a salad and you had the same iceberg lettuce every single day, that probably wouldn't be good. You might want to try to increase the range of types of plants in your diet, whether in your salad or on your plate. And there is some great research on the relationship between the diversity of plants and the diversity of your own microbiome that can greatly help your health. Now, that being said, since we're on the topic of brain health, if you haven't seen my other video on the brain, you should check it out. It's really cool. I put it up right here.